financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome and Happy New Year. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is January 2nd of 2018. Got to get used to saying that because it's here. Well, lots going on. First, though, be part of the show and don't hesitate to email us at kl@kerrylutz.com or the Twitter feed at Kerry Lutz. So are we heading towards the top? Is this what we've been waiting for? Gold, silver, going from moribund, dull complacency to higher still? Well, where are we going to head next for 2018? John Rubino, welcome back.
Hey, Kerry. It suddenly feels like we might be having one of those economic blow-off tops that happen at the peaks of cycles. We'd gotten so used to slow growth for such a long time. And banks had all the excess reserves; they weren't lending out, and it was kind of confusing because normally you get super low interest rates and high government deficits, and that leads to a extreme spike in economic growth fairly quickly. It didn't happen this time around, but apparently, maybe it's starting to happen finally, because just lately, home sales are spiking. Factory activity in the U.S. and Europe are way up. Stocks are up big lately, and again this morning. Interest rates are starting to rise, and even gold and silver are having nice pops lately. So you add it all up. And banks are apparently starting to lend out some of those excess reserves.
Hey. Totally. So, looking at gold today, let me just pop up the app rather than saying what happened before. Gold right now is up $8.50 the ounce, right around $13.1150. Silver up 21 cents, right in that over $17 an ounce, which is significant because you had gold break $1,300 last week, and then you had silver break $17. In and of themselves, round numbers probably don't mean that much. There is some resistance always at round numbers, but always when you see gold and silver break them both close to one another, it's kind of like a confirmation between the transports and the Dow Jones Industrials. It usually means we're heading up for a while, at least anyway. Yeah. It's good to see it.
But it's also kind of due because of technical reasons and seasonal reasons. This is a time when you would expect gold and silver to be going up regardless of what else is happening in the world. But, as a piece of the blow-off top puzzle, it's especially interesting. Oh, and one other thing that's part of that story is the explosion in cryptocurrencies. To have an asset class just go up like that at a time when economic growth seems to be picking up kind of implies that we've finally achieved escape velocity economically. But of course, that's the kind of thing that looks good in the moment, but is usually associated with downturns a year later because it creates a lot of bottlenecks. Prices of things start going up because supply gets tight, and wages start rising, and central banks feel obligated to raise interest rates, which is already happening. The U.S. Fed is looking for excuses to raise rates. The European Central Bank has been talking about scaling back their bond buying for a while, and we'll probably see rising growth in the EU as an excuse to do that. So we'll see monetary tightening in response to this spike in economic growth. And historically, that's the kind of thing that leads to a bear market in stocks and a downturn in real estate and a slowdown in the economy. So we'll see if it plays out this way again. But historically, a year like the one we've just had, and apparently the one we're moving into, is usually a sign of the end of an expansion. And if that's true, then you want to be shorting stocks and not buying real estate. All the things you would have done in 2006, 2007, if you could go back and do it again, maybe you want to be doing that again. So we'll see. But it's just interesting because it's such a contrast with the previous 6 or 7 years. They've been characterized by slow growth and a surprising lack of response to really loose monetary policy and fiscal policy. And now all of a sudden, we're getting what the Keynesian textbook says you should get from extreme monetary and fiscal ease. So we might be heading into a really different world from the past 3 or 4 years, and maybe a much scarier one.
Yeah, well, right now it's happy days are here again. And you know what I didn't realize? Like, happy days are here again. Yeah, it meant like supposedly the economy was going to rebound after FDR was elected. But what it really meant was happy days are here again because it's the end of prohibition. And we had the end of marijuana prohibition for recreational use in any event in California, largest marijuana market probably in the world.
That is a really interesting story. This is not getting as much play as I think it deserves, because California is so huge. You know, it's like a fifth of the U.S. economy. And it's one of the biggest, is standing alone, it's one of the biggest economies in the world. And they just legalized weed. That's a very big deal. And it's also kind of there's a theory called socioeconomics, which says, among many other things, that in relatively hard times, we tend to make things legal because we just don't feel like we can control the world. So we tend to get out of the way of stuff. And that's why prohibition was repealed during the Depression. And now we're seeing a repeat of that, where, you know, we've had slow growth for such a long time, and the world just doesn't seem like it's something we could control. So we don't feel cocky enough to try to impose our will on society. And so the government is just getting out of the way and letting stuff, you know, become relatively legal. And that's happening with drugs. So we should probably expect that to spread. You know, weed will be legal in 40 states within a decade. And other drugs will also be decriminalized just because, you know, it's proven impossible to control them. And we're losing the sense that we can control things. So I think the whole California weed initiative thing is important because it's a sign of big changes to come. And it's also a good thing. You know, from a libertarian point of view, we shouldn't be trying to control what people do with their bodies in any event, you know? So this is the first step in a long journey towards a society where people are responsible for themselves. And if they screw up, they screw up, but it's their own choice, you know, as opposed to a nanny state telling you what you can and can't do because you aren't trusted to manage your own life. So, you know, all things considered, I think it's very cool. And it's also a big moneymaker. You know, right now we pay Mexico and a few other countries huge amounts of money for drugs, and we basically finance their organized crime. So if we start making this stuff at home and selling it among ourselves, then we keep the profits. The organized criminals in other countries lose a big profit center, and they become less powerful, and real government gets to reassert itself in places like Mexico and Colombia. And I think that's a win-win. You know, it's a good thing for everybody. Agreed,
for sure. And I predicted after the crash of 08-09 that prohibition in the dreaded devil's weed would start to go away because two reasons: the potential revenue impact for states that are really under the gun. I mean, they are just melting down all over the place for that reason, and the savings in having to prosecute these victimless crimes and process the arrests, all that stuff. Yeah, I think they'll be going after the large-scale dealers, but they'll have to find another prohibition to put all those DEA agents to work. So maybe it'll be cryptocurrencies. They decide to try to ban them, right?
Yeah, Kerry, you know, you're right. That is another big part of this story, is that our prisons are full of nonviolent drug offenders who we're paying, $40,000, $50,000 a year to keep in a cell, you know, when they could be out working and paying taxes. And since at least they don't have a history of violence, they probably would be out working and paying taxes. And so we're talking billions and billions of dollars of savings from the end of prohibition.
Yeah.
And again, it's good from almost any angle. And because it will succeed when it's passed in individual states, it's going to spread. So this is you can point to a lot of horrible things that are happening out there. So it's nice to point to a good one once in a while. This is actually something we're doing right. And hopefully we'll keep on doing it.
Hopefully. We can only hope. I mean, really, as a libertarian, you want to see all this stuff be legalized because it's such a drain. There's violence that would never occur were these products legal like they once were. And look, education is the key. Educate people as to their potential harmful effects. I think we're capable of doing that. I mean, look at the way that nicotine sales have diminished in our lifetimes. When you and I were kids, more than half the adult population, smoked cigarettes. Now it's below 20. And if they would allow people to vape wherever they wanted, it would go down to 10%.
Yeah, people basically figured out that's a bad thing to do, and they're to the extent that they can, they're stopping doing it. We're not stupid, People do make mistakes. If you give people total freedom, some people will, shoot themselves with their own gun and gamble away their rent money and get addicted to drugs. That will definitely happen. But by and large, in the aggregate, most people will make good decisions because they understand what's right and wrong in their lives, and they know what's best for their families. So, the libertarian ideal is a society where we basically are free to do what we want as long as we don't interfere with other people's rights, but then we accept the responsibility for our choices. So, applying that to drugs, you get to take what you want. But if you screw up your life because of it, then you're responsible for that screwed up life. And for every person that does something like that, who screws up their lives, they serve as an object lesson for 100 other people who learn from the one person's mistakes and don't make those same mistakes. So we educate ourselves in a free society via our mistakes, which, by the way, is how capitalism is supposed to work. Companies are supposed to go bankrupt, and the 99% of other companies that aren't bankrupt will learn from the 1% who screw up. And in that way, the system keeps getting better and better, and it figures out what the boundaries are and how far you can push the envelope, et cetera, et cetera. But we've socialized loss here by bailing out the big banks and Wall Street in general and allowing them to take huge risks with no downside. And that's led to a society that's so over indebted that we can't help but have a huge crisis at some point because of that. So you can apply libertarian principles to all aspects of life, and especially the economic aspects. And in general, they produce a healthy society if we just have the discipline to live with the responsibility for our actions.
Yeah, it couldn't be any simpler than that, could it? It's like Doug Casey says, you only need two rules. Number one is don't do anything that's going to hurt anybody else. And number two, of course, is just do what you say you're going to do. In other words, like the Bible, honor your contracts, right?
Well, yeah, the rule of law and the inviolability of contracts are central to a functioning free market system. And you can divide countries up by how solid the rule of law is, and they cluster perfectly. They correlate perfectly with wealth. The richer countries are the ones where there's a rule of law and where contracts are taken seriously. The poor countries are places where those things aren't true. So yes, responsibility and honesty are crucial to a functioning society. And we've lost that lesson over the past, let's say since we went off the gold standard in 1971. You can trace so many things from that decision by Richard Nixon, and you can graph them against the time since then, and they all kind of begin in the early 1970s, and they all keep getting worse as we take on more and more debt because we have fiat currencies. So you can trace it all back to sound money.
You really can. Well, this idea that somehow we can legislate everything and cure all problems through legislation is just lunacy. It really is crazy because it doesn't work that way, right? I mean, it just can't work that way.
Yeah. I think the only place where I would fundamentally disagree with basic libertarianism is that antitrust laws. I think we should impose limits on how much power can be concentrated in the hands of any one company or any one oligopoly in an industry, as a way of maintaining free markets. But other than that, I think it's up to us to decide how we want to live our lives, or should be.
Yeah. Well, we could generally do it better than what the government tries to inflict upon us here, right? I mean, let's face it, you know what to do better than anyone else knows what to do with your life. Whether you want to do it or not is another issue. And the government's fully justified as putting incentives and disincentives there, as long as they don't try to make the decision for you.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of the free market asserting itself lately with the explosion in cryptocurrencies, for instance. That's basically a vote of no confidence in fiat currencies. And with gold and silver, although they've been flat lately, with them rising dramatically over the past 15 or so years. Gold was $200 and some an ounce in 2000. And so now it's $1,300 an ounce, which is also a vote of no confidence in the world's fiat currencies. The dollar and the euro and the yen have plunged versus precious metals and absolutely evaporated versus cryptocurrencies. So what that means is that the market is voting against these currencies that are being so badly mismanaged. And since the mismanagement is continuing, there's no reason to expect those votes to change. Capital is going to continue to flow into real assets and sound forms of money and out of fiat currencies until it becomes, till the trickle becomes a tidal wave. And at that point, the system falls apart. So we're heading for something like that. You can see the trends gaining speed and gaining power. Oh, yeah. And under the twin pressures of cryptocurrencies and precious metals, I think we're going to see a huge change in the behavior of fiat currencies over the next few years.
Oh, it's going to be a major, major change. And governments really, they'll be reactionary, try to keep things as the way they are, try to keep kicking the can down the road. But eventually the alternatives will overwhelm governments. And it's what we're seeing. Hey, it's also going to be a good year for freedom, 2018. I believe that Venezuela is going to collapse. Iran is collapsing right now, and it looks like they're going to, something is going to happen there. What I won't say right yet that it's going to all turn around there, but signs are pointing in the right direction. And other places, I think Cuba is in for a really difficult time, and you're gonna see a change there as well. Raul Castro is stepping down in February. We'll see if his self-appointed strongman is able to keep the ball rolling. But things are looking up like they haven't in a long time.
Yeah. The tide of history is generally towards freedom, but since all the systems that are spinning out of control have a lot of different kinds of weapons, it's going to be a messy process. That could be part of the story of 2018 is that we're kind of on the verge of conflict with a lot of people, and it would be nice if we got through it without any serious conflicts, without any kind of shooting war type anything. But history doesn't give a lot of optimism. When you've got a lot of things going on like this, usually one or two of them turn out to be worst case scenarios. So we have to hope that that's not the case in the year ahead, because there's an awful lot of stuff that could go wrong. Zero Hedge is running an article about how China is rushing soldiers to the North Korean border right now. Yes. In anticipation of what? I don't know, but that's the kind of thing that's really scary, because weapons have gotten so outrageous now. One H-bomb could take out half the East Coast in the U.S. And there are an awful lot of bombs like that in the world, so we have to be really careful going forward.
Yeah, we have to be very careful with this because it is a precarious time, but all major inflection points always are, it's the old Chinese symbol for crisis. One is danger, the other is opportunity. Unfortunately, without the danger, the opportunity will never present itself.
Yeah. It's just that the dangers in a nuclear world, especially where it's a diffuse nuclear world where lots of people have weapons, those are new dangers. Yes. We haven't seen anything like that in human history. And so it's completely possible that this time is different. And we just have to hope that we get through this in a wise and calm way. And I don't know, that's yet another reason to simplify your financial life by owning precious metals and not taking huge risks in the stock market and stuff like that. Just because you've got these external risks that are out there that are bigger than, or at least more complex than they were in the past. And one of the ways you deal with that is by making your own life as financially bulletproof as possible, and a lot of precious metals in hand, so that if things go a little crazy for a while, you've got real money and do the other kinds of, not necessarily extreme survivalist stuff, but take steps, have a generator, have some food on hand, stuff like that. As a just in case kind of thing, because the world really is scary and complicated right now in ways that we haven't seen really ever.
Yeah, well, you need to have a plan B. That's always key, right? You always need a plan B. Yeah,
you really do. And more so now than ever.
Agreed. So you have any big predictions for 2018, John?
Yeah, I think we see volatility come back in 2018. One of the characteristics of the last couple of years has been shrinking volatility, where financial assets just go up in price, kind of in lockstep, because of all the money that's been flowing in from the world's central banks. People have been buying fairly indiscriminately out there, which means that equities and bonds are not volatile anymore. They just kind of go up a little bit at a time without any big drops. And that's historically really unusual. So I think history reasserts itself in 2018, and we see volatility spike, which means not necessarily that stocks go down, but that they go down and come back up. They bounce around, although they could go down and just stay down. But I think that you can see an increase in volatility without necessarily a bear market. So one way to play something like this is with an ETF that tracks the VIX, which is an index of fear in the marketplace. So you can use that to hedge a stock portfolio, for instance, because if fear comes back to the marketplace, that means stocks probably went down and you probably lost some money on your stocks. But if you own an ETF that tracks the VIX, that goes up. So it's one way to hedge things. You can also do volatility spreads in the option market, where you buy a put and a call on the same equity, so that you lose money if it just sits there, but you make money if it jumps up or crashes. And in that way, you make money if volatility spikes going forward.
Yeah. So you use what's called a spread to kind of capture the profit on that volatility. And therefore, the cost isn't that big because the risk, you're only risking what you paid for the spread.
Yeah. And you do lose everything with options if it doesn't work out, but you make a lot if it does work out.
Yeah. Well, agreed. So that is it for our first show of the year. Just find John's work over at dollarcollapse.com. Ours, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for both our newsletters. Got a good one going out today. And John, be part of the show. Email us, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @kerrylutz, and Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. John, we'll talk to you next week, and let's see where gold is at then.
Thanks, Kerry. See ya.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival